Success Insight shares the stories of the people with passion and drive who make things happen in the world. Here's your host, Howard Fox.
Good morning, everybody. This is Howard Fox, and welcome back to another episode of the Success Insight podcast. Our guest today is Clare Stead. Clare is the owner and creator of Oliiki. Oliiki is an app for your smart device that is designed to help parents find the learning in everyday play to help their bump or baby reach their full potential. Clare is a teacher by training who then became an education researcher and has now turned her sights on e-learning, or I should say, has turned her sights on e-learning for the past 10 plus years. Clare has created an e-learning platform for primary age children around the world. She has built e-learning content for adults to help them learn new skills and is now creating e-learning content for parents to understand the learning and everyday play that their babies are getting. Clare, welcome to the Success Insight podcast.
Howard, thanks for having me. It's really lovely to be here.
Fantastic. In the spirit of full disclosure to our listeners, I met Clare on a podcast site called Spot a Guest, and we'll provide a link back to that later. But Clare was asking lots of questions about becoming a guest on a podcast and perhaps even maybe someday having a podcast herself. And, I just really was very curious about the work she was doing, especially with Oliiki and these smart devices for children. So, Clare, it's just a great opportunity to talk about today what is going on in the area of learning for children. And so tell us a little about yourself and what's Oliiki?
Okay, thanks ever so much. So yes, I'm a teacher, a primary school teacher by training, and I've worked as a teacher for 15 or so years, working around the world. I've worked in 3 different continents in a number of different classrooms. And then the children that for me were most exciting were the children who had clearly got intelligence and were capable of learning really well, but just didn't have the skills to access that learning. And consistently, I kept finding them in classrooms. And for me, they were the interesting children. You've got the children who are going to learn anyway, who are hungry to learn, and they're really exciting. But the ones that I want to get to grips with were the ones who just weren't unpicking it for some reason. And then I fell into becoming an education researcher. And we again worked with the top 5% of schools in England and Wales, looking for best practice and trying to roll that out across the country and make impact and change. But what we found was actually we were making most impact in the lower ability children. And that for me was quite fascinating. And again, it started looking for my interest in those children who just weren't accessing the learning that the government said they should be able to do. And then, because I'm actually quite old, I started doing this thing that didn't even have a name then, and making learning objects is what they were called. And even I didn't really know what they were. But it turns out that's called e-learning. And I was making it for a number of governments around the world. And so I would make the e-learning content that would be at the level that the government said the children should have. Some of the children still couldn't access that learning. And it consistently, you had this group of children that they weren't in the special needs group, but they were not accessing the learning. They didn't have the focus and the concentration and the pencil grip control and that sort of thing. And it got me thinking, and I wondered why and what was going on. Then I moved to Zambia and met a man on a plane, as you do. And of course. And he very kindly asked me he wanted to change the way education took place in Africa. And he asked me to come along and do it for him. Because that always is the way to have a job interview, isn't it?
Of course. Now, this was, I assume it was a long flight, and you actually had an engaging conversation, and the outcome was, you got to come to Zambia and help change it.
Well, that would be the American point of view, but we were British. So we sat next to each other for 8 hours in silence. And then on the last hour, we finally spoke. And I'm showing how old I am because he had this thing and I was desperate to know what this thing was. So eventually I said to him, what is that? And he said, it's an e-reader, which is the name that a Kindle was in the very beginning.
Right.
And it's just come out of America and I'm so excited. And so I couldn't quite believe this thing. So we were investigating together. And then we had this conversation all about how we were going to change education in Africa and how we were going to give kids the best opportunities they possibly could countryside, even if they were in the deepest, darkest bits of Africa with no connectivity. And how are we going to do it? It was a really big challenge. So he then, by the end of the flight, he asked me to come and help him. And I spent the next 10 years building a product which is now out in the market and rolling across Africa called Mwabu. And that is putting the whole of primary education on a tablet. Currently, I think it's in 9 languages, voiced and translated, for the children to be able to access the learning in their own language. And it helps the teachers move from rote learning to inquiry-based active learning.
How many languages are there in this device?
At 9 currently.
9 languages.
Mm-hmm.
And so really the device is language specific. So can you easily go from one to the other, or? Yes,
you swapped between the two.
Okay.
And while I was doing that, that's when I saw a graph that came out of Harvard by C.A. Nelson in 2000. But I saw it quite a bit later. And this graph showed the learning that takes place and the brain development in the first 1,000 days of life. So that goes from conception to 2. So there are 1,000 days from the conception of your baby right the way through until they're 2. And the brain development during that period of time is completely bonkers. Like, the graph is this massive peak in the graph of learning. And for me, it was like switching on a light bulb. It was the most exciting thing to find, because I suddenly realized that this was what was missing. We had all these children who weren't getting the stimulation that they needed in those early days for various reasons. It might be that mum and dad just don't have any time, or the kid. I was in Africa, so a lot of the children were on the back and people weren't necessarily talking to them in the same way, or mum and dad are working, or they just don't know how to do it.
So I have a question. You had said during your research years that the ability for the kids, especially the ones that were lowest ability, were they tied to the same types of findings you're here, whether it was time, work? Is it just not having good conversations with the children? And did it cut across all socioeconomic, racial spectrums?
It's a number of different things. It's parents not knowing how to interact with children, parents not realizing the importance of their interaction, not understanding the different kinds of questions you can ask a child, and that certain things need to be taught that you would think are implicit, that the children just learn. But actually, we have to teach, and we have to. I'm not talking about teaching ABC. I'm talking teaching through play, through experience, through just giving a child the opportunities. Yes, it cuts across socioeconomic environments as well. And though people will often say that the most vulnerable children are the ones in obviously the most deprived environments, actually, I believe there is another group that are at risk. And that's the group of the parent who is the nice middle-class parent. There's 2 people working full-time. They're really busy. Then they may even have a nanny. And the nanny and the child build an amazing relationship. But do the parent and the child build an amazing relationship? And is it a relationship that will last them for a lifetime? And are we setting our children up as teenagers to fail because they haven't built the relationship at the outset that sets the ground rules, that shows the child that when mum or dad says no, they actually just genuinely mean no? And have we given the child all those building blocks of learning that we need in place? Because learning is a bit like building a house. If you put the building foundation in really strongly, then what you get is a nice strong building with a roof that fits and sits on the top of the house. If it's not strong, there will be gaps. And then think about maths. When you go into school and you do math. When you think about that, if you have missed an understanding early on, like what's addition, what's it really mean, then the rest of your maths experience becomes extremely difficult because you can't build on those skill sets. And learning is like that. It's experiential learning. And, we build from the bottom up, and skill builds on skill. And until we've got those skills in place, we can't expect our children to have a strong foundation.
Sure. It sounds to me that there's the 2 opportunities that you are highlighting is there's teaching the child, from pre-birth conception to 2. And then there's also the learning for parents to teach them how to parent in relation to the talking, teaching, guiding, mentoring, teaching them how to have those kinds of conversations, as opposed to go play with your computer. You're bothering me.
You're absolutely right. There's both sides. And what we've done with the Oliiki app is we've shown parents that a very simple activity like singing Three Blind Mice or going for a walk, how the child is gaining learning from that. As the parent understands the learning that the child's gaining from doing that, they feel successful as a parent. So for example, if we talk about a baby holding a rattle, if the baby is holding the rattle, and if you put the rattle in their thumb and first 2 fingers and they hold the rattle and they shake it, well, funnily enough, that's the same muscles that you're using to hold a pencil. If you now know that, aren't you more interested and engaged in helping your child to do it more often? I'm absolutely not talking about pushing school down to being bumps and babies. Absolutely. If anyone ever were to think that, I'd be devastated. It's about play, and it's about what can your child learn through play. So if you take a toddler for a walk and they're looking at a berry, and you ask them to look at it, and maybe you take their time, you go at their pace, and you take, which is much slower than the rest of us would expect it to be, but we take the time to allow them to explore the world for the very first time often, and they look at a berry, and maybe this berry is a little red berry, and they look and they see the shininess, and they see one end's got the little tufty bits and one end's got a stalk, and they really look, and you use language and you talk to your child about that. When you realize that actually what you're giving that child is the focus and concentration that would allow them to differentiate between B and D when they get to school.
It's interesting here. You've just described holding the berry. There's a mindfulness, all for the sake of a better word, guru, Jon Kabat-Zinn.
Yep.
And I remember listening to one of his meditation tapes. I've never been a meditator. I probably should be a meditator. I think there's a lot of evidence that says it does wonders for you.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember this meditation, it all revolved around the grape. And what color was it? The texture was it? What did it smell like? What does the roughness, the smoothness? And I could see then that translating to what you've just described, as you were walking down the street, either in the carriage, what do you call a carriage in the UK?
Pram.
I was
Yes.
going to say that. Hey, I just watched Mary Poppins again.
Oh,
So no, it was Saving Mr. Banks. So I decided to go back and watch Mary Poppins. And so Pram, I had that right, but I digress. This idea that you are in the moment as a parent, being there for your child, helping them experience what it is they're experiencing, it seems to be something that is overlooked and that needs to be addressed. That sounds like that has the possibility of happening with Oliiki.
Yes, so the idea of the app is to build parental confidence. So you as a parent, in understanding that the simple things that you may already be thinking of doing, like singing Twinkle Twinkle or going for a walk or playing in water with your baby, that is actually doing an amazing job for your baby's brain. You are building your baby's brain. You are a brain builder, which is a phenomenal thing to think. And Oliiki just helps the parents understand, well, first of all, come up with a different idea every day for 1,000 days of something to do that's age appropriate and developmentally appropriate for their child. It's meant to be a kind of no stress app, because the last thing any new parent needs is, I haven't done my app, I haven't done this. But also there's no pressure, and it just needs to be a friend rather than anything else. So it then shows you how to do it. So don't drown the baby, because that's not great. Put sun cream on before you take it outside, that sort of thing. The rest of it is about you as a parent and trying to help you understand that what can be quite a tricky period of time when you actually haven't got a clue what you're doing, and this baby doesn't seem to be going away. It's your job. And you come home from work maybe and you're really tired. I remember that was one of my challenging times, the sort of like the 4 o'clock to 6 o'clock time when my childminder had fed my baby, and now what? I'm so tired, I just want to go to bed. And if somebody had told me what to do, I absolutely would have been most grateful. And to then have thought, well, wow, not only am I being told what to do, but I understand it and I understand the science behind it, then that would have been, for me, a fantastic help. And that's basically what Oliiki is doing. And it's just one of the biggest feedback I've had from parents is that it's building their confidence, and it makes them feel much more supported and much more like they're able to be successful. And as a teacher, we know that success breeds success. And so those little wins are the ones that build to the big wins. And what we're doing in those early days, even before the baby's born, then what we're looking for is the successes that build the relationship between you and your partner. Well, what kind of child do we want? Do we want a child who's a questioning child? Well, then maybe we need to accept that they're going to ask questions, in which case, are we ready for that? Or is that not really what we're set up for? Or are we wanting an independent learner, in which case we need to set the house up so they can be independent?
Where does that play into child or infant development? And the reason I'm asking this is from a personality, behavioral perspective. There's the idea that perhaps we're hardwired. So we know we're introverted versus extroverted. Noises really kind of overwhelm us. We tend to cry because we're the sensory overload versus the little baby who's like, they're in the middle of the discussion. They're like happy being around people. They don't want to be alone. So I was just curious because you were starting to say, I thought I heard you say, what kind of baby do we want? What kind of child do we want? I do think an introverted child, for example, needs parents that are willing to help them explore their discomfort.
Absolutely.
So I'm just kind of curious if you can kind of clarify that just a little bit.
Yeah, I'm not saying let's design a baby our baby. What I'm meaning more along the lines of is, do we want, if we want a child who ultimately is going to be a child who's prepared to take risks, if we then say on the slide, every time they go up the slide, is it a slide in America? The one that gives
Yes, yes it is.
If every time they go up the slide, say, oh, careful, it's not too high, careful. Are you allowing that child to discover their risks?
Right.
Or are you putting your risks on them?
Right.
Obviously, as a parent, it's our job to keep our babies safe.
Right.
But we need to, in other words, we need to look inside ourselves. And we need to think, are we being the parent that enables the child to be the child that we hope they can be? If we have an introverted child, we need to help support that child to grow and develop in their way. And it's not about parenting, it's about who am I being as a parent to enable my child to be the child that I would like them to be.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
I'm curious too, what your thoughts are. And I ask this because I think this app is just fascinating. This idea that the child is in their learning mode, they're exploring, they're starting to create the substance of who they're going to become. And the parents have this huge impact, whether they truly realize it or not. Is there an issue in the UK when the parents are walking the child in the pram down the street and they're clicking on their smartphone, not paying attention to the child? I see that all the time here in Chicago. I see, the dog owners, for that matter, they're on the cell phone while they're walking the dog. I
know, and the amount of accidents and accident emergency where people have walked into the lamppost or whatever.
I've seen that.
I think the cell phone has a massive, massive impact on all of our lives. And I think there was a research paper out the other day that said that I can't even remember what the numbers were, but something like 1 in 4 teenage children, secondary school children, has a smartphone, and they spend more than half their time on the phone or something like that. Honestly, the numbers were shocking. Please don't quote me on them. I don't remember what they were. But so I do think the cell phone has a massive amount to answer for, because I think that's part of the reason that we're not interacting in the same way. But I think it's more than that. I think it's the fact that we don't live in our extended communities anymore. We live in our nuclear families. We have doors and we close them. Kids aren't out in the street. I mean, I was writing the other day on one of my blogs about when I had my eldest child. She was 5 days old. I'd come home from hospital after a tricky birth and had my C-section, and it was time. In those days, you bathed your baby when you brought them home. So it was time to give her another bath, and my mother happened to be there, and I had done the bath, and by doing the bath I mean I picked this baby up, dunked it in some water, and sort of dunked it out again because it was all terrifying. But now my mother was about to bath her, and it was just an experience this baby went through. It was just the most amazing thing to watch, where she warmed the bathroom, she ran the bath, the baby was in the cot waiting perfectly happily playing, fully clothed. My mum got the towel organised. She then brought the baby in and wrapped her up, made her cosy and chatted to her. She tested the water, and then she dipped the baby in and they played. This baby was 5 days old. And then she rotated the baby. This was the bit where our mind was blown, where she rotated this baby and we saw her back. And I was horrified, absolutely horrified to discover that my baby wasn't perfect. My baby had a strawberry nevus, which is actually just a raised set of blood cells on her back. But I didn't know. I was her mother, and I didn't know that she had this thing on her back because I've never seen her back before, because I wasn't brave enough to hold the baby the other way round. I didn't know how to do it. But by watching my mother, I learned the skills of how to do that. But we don't have that so much anymore. We might hire in some help. We might get a little bit of input from mum or dad or granny or an auntie who's down the road to help us. But that support isn't there anymore for the like we used to have when we grew up in communities. And therefore, that modelling isn't there. That was just easily done. And so we're having to learn it from scratch now.
That's amazing. You briefly alluded to it a few minutes ago, Claire, about the reactions from others about the app. I wonder if you could share a couple more stories of what you are hearing from the individuals, the organizations, the schools, whoever is getting this app and using it for the parents and the child. What are you hearing?
So health visitors are really interested in using the app with their families to support their work. So what they're wanting to do is use the app almost as a conversation piece. So they're in their weekly meeting, they'll have a conversation. They'll talk about, look, what's coming on the app next week for you? What do you feel about doing those? How do you think you'll get on with it? And then the parent goes away confidently to give some of those activities a go, and then comes back next week and discusses it, which means that the parent has had those little wins. They feel much more successful. And these are families who are the at-risk families, the ones who need support. And for them, a little win is actually a massive win. So that's the health visitors. The parents who are buying it themselves are giving feedback that it's giving them lots of different ideas of what to do, that they actually now feel they're doing the right thing and they don't have to worry about it anymore. A load of them have said, I've stopped Googling because I'm sick of the contradiction. And that for me is quite big. And I had one woman say to me the other day, I didn't think I could have a baby, but what I'm seeing in your posts makes me think that I can. I mean, that's really exciting.
Wow, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. Where do you see this app going in the next, let's just say 3 to 5 years? Where would you like to see this app going?
Okay, my dream.
Your dream
would be that every parent, and I mean men and women, was given it at check-in with the midwife. So that it becomes part of the conversation that you have with any professional, so that it has its status. In other words, play is put at the centre of parenting. We're putting learning at the centre of parenting through play. That means our children are arriving at school ready to learn, because when education works, it is wonderful. When it doesn't, it's a daily reinforcement of failure. And why would we want to put our children through that? Very
good. Thank you for that. And I would be remiss if I didn't ask you, knowing that you are in the UK, 2 times in events that I have attended, I had the pleasure of hearing a keynote from Sir Ken Robinson, and his work just totally blew me away. And I'm wondering, this app, I mean, I would imagine he loves this app. He's got to love this app.
I would love Ken Robinson. I mean, the God, Ken Robinson, he is my hero. He's absolutely what Ken Robinson is talking about. It's about putting creativity at the center and the heart of everything that we do in the home. And I'm talking about starting before school. I'm talking about giving our kids play status. And if you ask me whether or not that stops at 2, in my world, no, it goes right the way through, and it should be the center of all education all the way up. I went to a conference really recently that had the Lego Foundation were running part of it, and they came and they did a session, and they gave us 6 bricks, and we had to make a duck. And it was at Cambridge University, and the room exploded with cacophony of noise. People were talking, they were interacting, they were communicating. And then the next follow-on activity was to work with your partner and join your 2 ducks together to make one bigger duck. And the learning that was taking place was phenomenal. And if that's a group of academic adults in Cambridge University that are getting pleasure and interaction and learning from play, why is it not the center of all of our education?
Very much so. Who are the other thought leaders in this area of work? I wanted to say niche, but it's not a niche. I mean, this is definitely a mindset, and it's also got a change in the paradigm of what is education, whether it's in the UK, here in the US.
You've got the Centre on the Developing Child in Harvard, who did the original work. And when I saw their work, it blew me away. It was like a light bulb moment. And basically what they've taken is the mega clever neuroscience and made it human. What I've done is taken that human stuff and make it parent-friendly and child-friendly. And then you've got people like the Saving Brains community in Canada, who, again, fantastic stuff. And then in the UK, you've got the Parental Institute at Cambridge, who are, as I understand it, the first people who are doing research into play, which is phenomenal. And then the critical First 1001 Days organisation in the UK, who are, again, they're making the case for babies and talking about it. There are others, or why relationships matters and parent foundations and that sort of thing. There's a lot out there, but it's a small group of fairly vocal people. And then the newest kid on the block, which is not really new, but the loudest voice at the moment is the Duchess of Cambridge, who's talking about it and how important. And she's just launched, actually, her Royal Foundation has just launched something called the 5 Big Questions. And it's a survey where she wants to find out what people are thinking is the most important thing about the first 1,000 days.
Wow. I have to tell you, maybe the Duchess of Cambridge should get a copy of your app. And I would, go right to the top there. I would like to, if we can, in our show notes, include as many of these links as possible, because I think our listeners would love to learn more about it. I mean, we have done, I think we're going on close to a dozen children's book authors on the Success Insight podcast. And, I find it interesting now that I have been chatting with you, as many of those books start at age 2 to 5, age 6 to 10, 12 and above. I don't recall ever seeing a book that started, pre-0, or let's start at 0 to 2.
Well, why don't we start at pre-0? Because in the Oliiki app, that's one of our jobs, is to build a book.
Yeah.
And it's that first book, the black and white books, and it's one of the activities for mum or dad to do in the wait for the baby to come, is to build a book. And they don't have to be an artist. It's just about getting a black felt tip and doing some shapes and patterns and putting it together and sharing it with their baby and talking it through. And in fact, it's the second activity in Oliiki that you do once your baby's born. The first activity is to spend time and talk to them. Day 2 is read them a book, because it's so vital that we start reading with these babies as early as possible.
Fantastic. Clare, it has been an absolute pleasure to have you on the Success Insight podcast, and really to be introduced to the work you're doing, and really some of the insights and the light bulbs are going off in my head. And of course, mentioning Dr. Ken Robinson, because I always think about his keynotes. I mean, the man is just amazing, and the TED Talks, and it's like, I would love to go listen to him again. So if he doesn't have this app, he needs to have the app.
I tell you, if I could have dinner with Ken Robinson, that'd be amazing. In fact, can I put some people on the table? I'd put him, I'd put Professor Jack Shenkoff, I'd put Paul Ramdanchani from the Parental Institute. There's a load of people that I'd put on there, maybe the Duchess of Cambridge. We could all talk about play, we could talk about kids, we could talk about learning. I'd be blown away. That's my dinner party sorted out.
I think it's all sorted out. Let's do this. And
thank you very much.
We will do our part in our show notes to have the backlinks to Sir Ken Robinson, the websites to the foundations, et cetera. So we're going to do.
Thank you.
We're going to do what we have to do to support this. Clare, go ahead.
It'd be just amazing to make the impact that we can make on babies' lives and the next generation and the next generation after that. So that's what I'm looking to do, make that impact and make change.
Fantastic. Claire, if our listeners would like to learn more about you and your work, and especially about Oliiki, where are the best places for them to go?
So our website is Oliiki.com. And then, of course, there's Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn, and the good old Instagram.
Good old Instagram. It's interesting. I would probably suggest you go on Pinterest, because many children's book authors are on Pinterest. And
I made an account.
Okay,
but I don't think I did much more than that. But yes, I probably ought to.
I actually had an account until I had actually a children's book author, Lisa Rose, and we're on Pinterest. And so I went to look on Pinterest, and it's like, oh, wow. So your podcast, because we are talking about children, we're going to put that on Pinterest as well. In any case, the fact that you are active on the social sites and the website is perfect. And we will provide the backlinks to those sites on the show notes, as well as we'll work with you to get these other organizations. Yeah.
Thank you. And if anyone's interested in the app, it's available in the app stores.
And we'll actually provide the links to it as well. I am excited. I just think this is fantastic. And, even with adults in our learning and development, career development, professional development, the use of apps doesn't have to be earth-shattering. It just needs to be baby steps, just a little bit at a time. Yeah.
Baby steps. There's little successes, because you know what? I was thinking about it the other day, and those little successes just make you feel good. And if you feel good, you are good. It's not rocket science, but it is really nice when we feel proud of ourselves.
Fantastic. Claire, thank you again for being on the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right, folks, we have just been chatting with Clare Stead. Claire is the owner and creator of Oliiki. This is an app for your smart device, and it's designed to help parents find the learning in everyday play, and then to help them through the bump and onto the baby to help them reach their full potential. Do check out Claire's website. It's Oliiki.com, and we'll provide a link to that, as well as to her sites on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And we're also going to provide a whole bunch of other links to some of the organizations and thought leaders, such as Sir Ken Robinson, that we had discussed during today's podcast. Totally fascinating episode. And this is really, again, why I love this podcast, because we could be talking about everything is about leadership, entrepreneurship, conflict management. But what I love about the podcast is the range of guests that we get to have on, and really learning about Claire and her passion for this work and this app that she's created, and the potential and the uses for it are boundless. So I'm really excited to be able to share this episode with you. So again, I hope you enjoyed it. Please let us know what you thought of the episode on our website, successinsightpodcast.com. If you found us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, no, we're really not that much on Instagram, Pinterest, YouTube. Do let us know what you thought of the podcast. Follow our pages, and there's going to be more great episodes coming up on the Success Insight podcast. So wherever you are, whatever you're doing, go out there, have a phenomenal day, and we'll see you again soon. Take care now.
Success Insight is a production of Fox Coaching and First Story Strategies. Find us online, successinsightpodcast.com.